the first of a series of what we call Wed Society webinars. Many of you who are tuning in are actually in the wedding industry or some sort of creative entrepreneur. So the topic is how solopreneurs and small businesses can benefit from the $2 trillion stimulus package right now. Everything was signed into law on Friday. So I'm Ashley Murphy, and I'm one of the co-founders of Wed Society, which is an online and social wedding vendor community that was formed to support creative entrepreneurs and small businesses within the wedding space. So if you're in the wedding industry, we invite you to join our email list at wedsociety.com and our social community on Instagram at Wed Society. I will also say many other small businesses and solopreneurs are also joining in that aren't necessarily in the wedding space. I wanted to make sure to note that this webinar is sponsored by BrandLink Media. It's a digital marketing partner to small and mid-sized businesses looking to level up their digital marketing strategies and connect with their customers, as we're all having to do right now in new and innovative ways in light of COVID. So BrandLink offers website design, graphic design, social media management, and other paid digital strategies. You can learn more at brandlinkmedia.com. And finally, this webinar absolutely would not be taking place without our expert panelists, Ms. Kendra Robben, who is managing partner at Robben Law. Kendra is actually a dear friend of mine, but also just a tremendous resource when it comes to navigating very complicated subject matter and boiling it down so we as business owners can take the actions that are needed. Kendra is a corporate law attorney with a background in accounting and is well versed in all things legal for every size business. She's also actually an adjunct law professor and conference speaker. And as I said, just able to break complicated topics down into easy to understand content with practical steps. So because she is an attorney, I have to add a little bit of a disclaimer here that content that we may share or that will be contained on this webinar is intended as information sharing and educational purposes only, and it's not intended to, nor does it constitute any legal advice, and no attorney-client relationship is formed. So with all of that housekeeping out of the way, I definitely just want to start to turn things over to Kendra. For those of you guys tuning in, I know that you know on Friday, President Trump signed off on a historic $2 trillion stimulus package, which is the largest emergency aid package in U.S. history, and it's all aimed at helping individual workers and small businesses and industries grappling with economic challenges, including $350 billion, I believe, in loans backed by the U.S. Small Business Association. So we've got quite an amount of content to cover in this webinar. And Kendra and I talked in advance, and we thought we would kind of outline for everyone that is joining in how we plan to go through the agenda and the topics. And so I'll give you that up front. First, we're going to cover direct cash payments that are outlined as part of this relief plan. We're going to cover tax deadlines to be mindful of and tax deadlines that have been extended. We're going to talk about the substantially expanded unemployment rules. We're going to talk about, I think, what everyone is anticipating a lot of discussion on, the Payroll Protection Program, also called PPP loans, and you may hear us reference that. So we're going to talk about eligibility for that and how much you can borrow and how does forgiveness work and how and when to apply and all of that good stuff. We're going to also touch on other SBA loans that are available and grants, the economic injury disaster loan that we've all heard a little bit about, and then other tax credits that are available. So we will likely not have time to cover emergency sick leave for employers and FMLA and some of those topics. We'll see, but I kind of highly doubt it. We are trying to keep this to a reasonable time frame. As far as the flow of events, we plan to talk about each of the topics that I just outlined, and then we would request that you try to keep your questions focused on the topic that's being discussed at that moment. We will definitely try to answer as many questions as possible on each of the topics, but definitely just put your questions over in the chat, and we will work our way through them. Just try to keep them confined to the topic that we're currently discussing. We will also take questions at the end as we wrap up everything, so you can plug in your questions. You can upvote a question, I think, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. To the extent that you have a hyper-technical question based on your specific situation, you might consider saving that for a follow-up email. You can email, I'm going to give you both email addresses for myself and Kendra. Kendra's is Kendra at robbenlaw.com. That's ROBBENLAW.com. And mine is Ashley at wedsociety.com. We will work together to get you information that you might need to address specific questions or those hyper-technical situations. So with that, man, Kendra, let's just jump right in and talk about the first item on our agenda, which is direct cash payments. What is this? And tell us a little bit about eligibility.
Okay. So I did want to just cover these briefly. I know most people have probably kind of heard the headlines about this, and the headlines, it's pretty straightforward about what is going to happen. So all U.S. residents with adjusted gross income up to $75,000 or $150,000 for married filing joint, who aren't a dependent and claimed on someone else's return, are going to be eligible for a $1,200 direct payment or $2,400 for married, and an additional $500 for each eligible child. So those are eligible for everybody with AGI up to those limits. They are, and the rebates amounts are phased out if your income is over $99,000 or $198,000 for married filing joint. So if you're, under those limits, you'll get and under the 75 and 150, you'll get the full amount. And if you're in between the 75 and the 99 or the 150 and the 198, you'll get some phased out amount of that. And if you're over those top amounts, you won't expect to see any. As far as we know, they are working as quickly as they can to sort of process those payments. If they already have your banking account information because you were getting your refunds direct deposited, or that if they already have your bank account information, we expect that those will just be deposited directly into the bank accounts they already have on file. For people who they don't already have your bank account information, we expect that they'll be mailing checks afterwards, so those will probably be a little slower. So pretty much the headlines that you've read on all of that seem to be pretty accurate. So we'll just be waiting to see when, further announcements. We don't know yet about exactly what timing we can expect those to come.
Kendra, this is adjusted gross income, and you can find that on your individual tax returns.
Correct.
So the AGI that you mentioned, and also if you haven't already filed your taxes, which many of us haven't, and that deadline, which we're getting to, is going to be extended, well, maybe still encouraged to still, file those taxes, but you can go off of 2018 AGI numbers, right, for your household.
Right. And if you haven't filed, and you could go ahead and file and include your bank account information between now and then, that would probably be helpful. So if you haven't filed and you want to go ahead and get your 2019 in and make sure that you put your bank account information on that, then that should help them have your bank account information if you weren't normally getting your refunds direct deposited.
Okay, awesome. Answering a couple of questions here. Carrie, we don't plan to share our screens for any images, but we do plan to provide some links, so stay tuned for that. And then we have a question about how does this apply to college students? I claimed my son on my taxes, but I heard the $500 child is only up to 17. Do you know anything on that, Kendra?
What I know so far is what I have heard is the same thing, which is that I do think that the way I've heard it is that the child credit's going to be for those that are up to 17. And the problem is that it is, if he's claimed on your return, then that's going to make him a dependent, and he won't be able to get the direct payment by himself. I have heard a little speculation from some tax attorneys that I'm familiar with that are speculating about whether college students might be able to file for 2019. If you haven't already filed, be able to file for 2020 as they're on their own return and not be claimed as a dependent. on your return, and whether or not that is. Technically, these are essentially like a prepayment of a rebate that's going to be on your 2020 return. And so technically, if they're not a dependent on the 2020 return, then they should qualify. But of course, if it doesn't happen based on your historical information, it's not going to be right away. It wouldn't be until you could file your 2020 return that you might be able to take advantage of that. So that's sort of what we're understanding, is that there might be some games to play there later, depending on how the regulations come out. But for right now, we're probably stuck with whatever's on your historical return information. And I think it's the same thing. College students are going to be out of luck for direct payments.
Okay. Good question here about, do you have to do anything to apply for the stimulus? I'm assuming she's talking about direct payments here to individuals.
In terms of direct payments, I don't think you're going to have to do anything to apply, other than if you weren't already filing tax returns, you need to be filing a tax return in order to claim. So if for some reason you weren't qualified, or you weren't required to file a tax return, you probably want to go ahead and file a tax return again and include your bank account information so that you can be easily in the system.
Okay. Any way to add a bank account now without filing, or check if the government has your bank account on file?
If you've received your refunds electronically in the past, they probably have it. I'm not aware. Some of the CPAs that are on might have a better, they could comment if they know differently about a way to add your bank account after you've already filed your 2019 return.
Okay. Are these salary requirements weighted by where you live?
No,
okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Let's see. So just an example here, if we file jointly, if a family files jointly, both are self-employed and make over $150,000 together, she says we are not eligible, correct?
If you're filed jointly, there'll be a phase out for AGIs in between 150 and 198,000. Okay. So if it's between 150 and 198, you'll get some amount, but not the full amount. And if it's over 198,000 filing jointly, you will not get one.
Okay. Is a senior citizen who hasn't filed a tax return in several years still going to be receiving the payment?
Yes, it's my understanding that you would still be eligible for the payment, even if you have just SSI income or something that wouldn't be it, although it may not be coming automatically and immediately based on your bank account information. So I believe you'll still be eligible, but it might be not coming at the same time that you get, all the news outlets are saying check your bank account.
Yeah. And Kendra, do we have any idea when families and individuals can expect to be receiving these checks if they do have the bank account on file from a previous tax filing?
The last news article I saw, which I do not have any more specific guidance from Treasury that I have seen, is supposedly within 3 weeks of the passage of last Friday. So, I mean, they're supposedly soon.
Okay. Let's see. Yes. Lots of questions rolling in here. We might need to save some of these for the very end and jump back to them so that we can cover the ins and outs of some of them.
I think that might be good, because I think we have a long way to go on the more complicated stuff. Okay. But I'm happy to stay and answer questions at the end that are real specific to your specific thing.
Yes, we are trying to be sensitive to time needs, but yes, Kendra and I are both available to stay on and answer more specific questions. All right, so moving right along, Kendra, just tax deadlines to be mindful of, or any that have been extended. Tell us what important deadlines we need to know about.
Yeah, I mean, especially for those of you who are, small business owners and solopreneurs, I just want everybody to make sure, which I'm sure you've also heard, but the filing deadlines for April 15th have been extended to July 15th. That includes the requirement to not only to file, but also to pay, as I understand it. And it should include or it does include the requirement that you make your estimated tax payments. So your normal estimated tax payments, if you're making those quarterly payments, if your normal ones that you would have had to pay on April 15th also have been extended. It's my understanding that a lot of states have went along with that, and a lot of states have extended their April 15th filing deadlines and payment deadlines until July 15th, but not all of them. So if you're paying in estimated payments to more than one state, you need to check and make sure with each state that you're making estimated tax payments in, which ones need to continue to be paid by April 15th and which ones have been extended.
Okay.
But that should help everybody with cash flow in the meantime, if you want to delay payments on stuff that you were going to have to pay in.
Yes. And is there any reason that people need to go ahead and consider filing by April 15th? Any reason whatsoever if they maybe
If you're expecting a refund, I understand that you can go ahead and file and get your refund just like you would have normally. So if you're expecting a refund, I think people are pushing forward to file.
Okay. And what about if your AGI may be very different this year than last year, and you might become eligible for the stimulus or something like that? Do you have any insight?
Well, remember that right now you're only filing your 2019 tax return. So yes, if you get your 2019 filed and they have your 2019, it will be based on that. My understanding is that when it is time to eventually file our 2020 returns, if your previous income was too high for you to get the payment, but your 2020 income has dropped to a point that you would qualify for the payment, that you will be able to get the payment at that point. But again, that's not until, spring of next year. So if your 2019 income, is going to put you, you can strategize about that, about if you haven't yet filed your 2019. If they have your my understanding is if they have your 2019 on file, they'll use that for the AGI calculation.
Some questions about if you've heard any word on the second quarterly payments that are normally due around June 15th, if those plan to be extended. Have you heard anything on that?
I have not heard anything official on anything on June 15th payments yet.
Okay. Let's see. All right. I think if we have other questions, let's just save those for the end and kind of jump right into what has been an area that's been substantially expanded on unemployment, particularly as it relates to the self-employed. So give us an overview of this, Kendra.
Right. So I think what's most important here for small business owners and solopreneurs and those of you who may be self-employed in the wedding industry or out is to understand that this is an expansion of the regular unemployment program. So just because you were not previously the kind of person who could qualify for unemployment benefits if you were short on work, that has been expanded. So the Act is going to create a temporary pandemic unemployment assistance program, and it is going to provide payments to covered individuals who are going to be people who are not traditionally eligible for employment benefits, such as independent contractors and self-employed individuals. And so if you are all of a sudden normally an independent contractor, or if you're normally a self-employed individual and you are all of a sudden completely out of work, it's my understanding that you are going to be able to go ahead and apply for unemployment benefits. I think you'll apply, or my understanding is you'll apply straight through your state system as usual, but you'll be eligible, expanded eligibility for the normal calculation of what you would be eligible for, and there will be an additional $600 a week benefit that is just a flat fee benefit that is going to be basically tacked on top of unemployment of your state's regular unemployment for anybody who can qualify. Covered individuals are going to include those who are not eligible for regular employment benefits and who provide a certification that they are otherwise able to work, but for the list of covered reasons, which includes being diagnosed with COVID-19, having a member of your family be diagnosed, if you're providing care for a family member that's diagnosed, if a child is unable to attend school because it is closed because of COVID-19, if you're unable to get to work because of a quarantine order, if you have quit your job as a direct result of COVID-19, if your individual's job is closed as a direct result of COVID-19, or if you are self-employed, if you are seeking part-time employment, or if you don't have any sufficient work history or would otherwise not qualify for regular unemployment or extended benefits, then you're going to qualify under this extended pandemic emergency program. So what I guess I just want to say about this is I have not yet seen nearly to the level of guidance yet about exactly how this is going to get administered, as we have now seen about some of the PPP programs that we're going to talk about later. So on this, some of the really detailed questions about exactly how they're going to calculate how much you get if you're self-employed, we really haven't seen a lot of guidance and detail on that exactly yet. But in most states, you should be able to apply online. The statutory language indicates that there's going to be some method prescribed for applying for weeks that are previous to now even, so that it's going to be somewhat retroactive, but it just says they shall come up with a procedure to pay people for previous weeks, and I have not yet seen exactly what is going to be, how that's going to be defined yet. So on the unemployment piece, I guess the takeaway would be to say that if none of these other programs that we're going to talk about are going to get you paid, then you can apply for unemployment, and you should do so, and work through, once we get the state's guidance about exactly what you're going to have to do when you say self-employed and what kind of information you're going to have to provide. So there shouldn't be any reason that you can't apply and see if you can get that payment under that as those programs roll out. If you're not already getting your payroll or your self-employed paychecks through one of these other programs that we're going to talk about because you're a business owner.
Mm-hmm. So let's put this into the context of a wedding vendor, maybe a wedding planner who's had, all of their weddings, canceled for the foreseeable future, and is a self-employed individual. They're saying they fall within this new expanded unemployment provision, and they can apply when traditionally they would not have been eligible because they are self-employed.
Correct. So I think that in that case, you are going to be able to submit an application for unemployment. And I don't know exactly how yet. I don't know the calculation about how they're going to figure out what your regular unemployment part is, but whatever that number is, plus the $600 per week additional payment is what you're going to be eligible for.
Okay. And applying for the unemployment should not impact eligibility under the other loan relief programs that we're going to be talking about here upcoming to our knowledge.
It's now you cannot get unemployment for a week that you were otherwise receiving other compensation. Okay, so you can't, unemployment happens week by week, and you're going to have to recertify under all the programs about your income that you have coming in. So, I mean, if you're getting a loan that's going to cover your payroll and you're paying yourself payroll for 8 weeks or whatever, you're not going to qualify during those periods. But I have not seen anything that would indicate to me that somehow getting the PPP loan would make you otherwise eligible for unemployment if you're still unemployed after the 8-week period. Okay. So to my knowledge, I think they're two separate programs, and some of the things say you specifically can't do it if you're getting the PPP loan, but I haven't seen anything that ties the unemployment piece to the loan piece.
Mm-hmm. What about, if this is a good question, if photographers or planners or whoever in the wedding space are still getting deposits for future events that are being booked and that kind of thing? Any thoughts there, Kendra?
I'm not sure how unemployment will treat that. My inclination, if it was, back to my legal, basis, we're not counting that as income until we've actually earned it after the thing. So my inclination would be that deposits, as long as they're held and not spent normally, might not disqualify you. But again, since it is completely new that people who are self-employed like that might be able to qualify for unemployment, I don't know how we're going to get, I don't know what kind of regulations we're going to get about that kind of stuff. I do assume, again, it was just Friday that this was passed. The states move somewhat slower than the feds about this stuff. I do assume we'll get guidance about that sometime. I just don't know that I've seen anything yet that's going to give me that kind of clarity.
Okay, another question here. Can you define self-employed? I am a small business owner receiving a salary from my business and have 3 employees.
I think that you would be considered, I think that would be considered self-employed if you're, I don't know if your salary, like it's an S corp and you're paying yourself wages. If you fire yourself, then you're no longer getting wages, and I think you're going to be, under this expanded definition, considered unemployed.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of this. Thanks for us to reply. It just sounds like there's a lot of feedback here on the state systems being sort of overwhelmed right now with the application process. I am sure that that's the case. But I still would make strides to, if you're self-employed individual that's been impacted and you now are eligible to go ahead and make every effort to file an application.
I tend to agree. So the only practical thing in this is completely anecdotal, but perhaps you might want to try applying during off hours and less between the hours of 8 and 5, just based on the overwhelmingness of the systems. And hopefully some of these other things we're going to talk about are going to give you some options too, in addition to just unemployment. So
okay. Let's move on to another important topic that might require a little bit more of our time and attention. We're going to talk about the Payroll Protection Program, otherwise referred to as PPP loans. We're going to walk through eligibility for that, how much you can borrow, how does forgiveness work, and how and when to apply. There are a lot of intricacies to this, I would say. This is the program that authorizes basically $350 billion in forgivable loans to small businesses, which is less than 500 employees who were in business as of February 15th, 2020, to pay their employees during the COVID crisis. And individual businesses, as long as you're still considered a small business, are eligible for single loans up to 10 million. And, a portion of that or 90% of that could be forgivable. So there are certain parameters that we have to walk through. Obviously, a very, very small business isn't going to be eligible for a $10 million loan. So we'll talk about this in a little more detail. And I'll let Kendra kind of weigh in on just telling us a little bit more generally about the program.
Yeah. So just so everybody's aware, and in terms of your questions about where I'm going to go, I'm going to start with who's eligible. Then I'm going to run through the calculation about how much you can borrow and how you figure out how much you can borrow. I'm going to talk through the forgiveness aspect and figuring out what's going to be forgivable and the limitations and the those drawback or the limitations on that. I'm going to talk about the terms for what the loan would look like for the portion that ends up not forgivable. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about when and how to apply. So it's sort of detailed, and I think it's worth it in this case to get through the details on some of these. So you are going to be eligible if you are a small business with fewer than 500 employees. You are going to be eligible if you are a 501c3 with fewer than 500 employees, which I know is not most of us here, but everybody knows someone. You are going to be eligible if you are an individual who operates as a sole proprietor. You are going to be eligible if you are an individual who operates as an independent contractor. You're going to be eligible if you are an individual who is self-employed who regularly carries on any trade or business. So very expansive definition of who is going to be eligible to apply. It is intentionally expansive, unlike lots of government programs where there's lots of gotchas. This is very intentionally expansive and very clear that it is going to apply if you're, just a, Schedule C, solo entrepreneur, or any sort of a small business, as long as you don't have more than 500 employees. Okay.
Any questions on eligibility? Just really quick. It's very expansive, like she said, so.
Okay, let's run through the rest. So how much can you borrow? You are going to be able to borrow 2.5 times your average monthly payroll cost, okay? So basically 2.5 months worth of your average payroll cost. Payroll cost is going to include, for people who are employers, it is going to include the sum of the payments that are compensation with respect to your employees. So salary, wages, commission, any sort of a similar compensation that you're giving to your employees, any sort of cash tip or the equivalent of cash tip, any sort of, payroll cost and, payments for vacation or sick leave or anything like that. Payments of retirement benefits and payments of group health care insurance premiums. So you'll be able to find the specific requirements and regulations on the Treasury website when you go to apply, but your payroll cost is going to include all of those things you would normally think about for your employees. For sole proprietorships, independent contractors, and self-employed individuals, it's going to include the sum of payments of any compensation or income of the sole prop or independent contractor that's wage, commission, income, net earnings from self-employment or similar compensation up to $100,000 a year. So it's going to include your net income up to $100,000 a year. So basically, payroll cost is going to include all of your normal typical payroll costs. My understanding from the guidance that just came out yesterday afternoon is that instead of the specific language that kind of indicated it was going to be based on sort of a trailing 12 months, the regulations have basically authorized them that they're pretty much going to be authorized to just use your 2019 numbers. So in terms of getting your numbers together, your 2019 payroll tax forms that went in with your W-2s and, and your 2019 income tax return is going to be the information that you're going to need to be getting together to the bank to figure out how much is included in payroll cost. So payroll cost is going to be all of those things, excluding any compensation that's paid to any individual in excess of the $100,000 salary, right? So for people who are making more than $100,000, basically you have to exclude the excess, but you can still include their cost up to the $100,000 prorated, for what it would be for that month, for that monthly period. So then you'll be eligible. Just want to make sure I'm catching all of this. Mm-hmm. So then basically once you figure out what those payroll costs are, then you're going to be able to borrow 2.5 times that amount is going to be the maximum amount that you are eligible to borrow.
Okay. So Kendra,
yes.
I see a question about where you're sort of citing this from. I know you've been studying the 800+ page bill itself. Is this part of the bill that you're directly reading from, or I know you've summarized all of this for yourself too.
Yeah. Well, as I'm reading here, I'm reading from my notes and everything. The full text of the bill, if anybody's interested, I can send you. But mostly, I think I would direct most people at this moment to the Treasury website, which is where the application can be found. So I think if you want the most up-to-date guidelines from the Treasury and a copy of the application, you're going to be going to treasury.gov/cares.
All right, and I will put that link in here.
Treasury.gov/cares. There you will find the link to the actual application, and you're going to find the guidance that has been coming out within the last 24 hours here from Treasury about how this is going to go. If you've got a hyper-technical question, feel free to email me, and I will be able to send you a more direct source or a piece of the code. But the actual bill was 880 pages long, so I'm quoting from my notes because them.
Okay. A couple of questions that I see here. Do you include a year-end bonus or 401k match in this payroll figure?
I think you're going to be able to include in the payroll figures. I understand that you're going to be able to include retirement contributions, so I think you're going to be able to use that. And the way that I think the regs have it calculating as of yesterday afternoon, you're going to be able to essentially sort of take your 2019 numbers and annualize them on a monthly basis. So I think the answer to that is going to be yes. I mean, you can include those amounts, but again, we're talking about how much you can borrow, which is a different question from how much could possibly be forgiven and what you need to spend it on. So for purposes of them figuring out how much you're going to be able to borrow, I think they're going to be, these are going to be sort of quick and dirty calculations, and I think that they're going to be using whatever your total, W-2 comp numbers were for 2019 and essentially dividing by 12. If it is for people that made less than 100,000.
Okay. To go about applying for one of these loans, you do have to go through an SBA preferred lender. I believe, at least initially, that was the thought.
I'll talk a little bit more about it when we get over to how we're going to apply, but actually that has been substantially expanded just yesterday afternoon based on the new Treasury regulations. So at this point, you're going to be going not through the SBA directly, like you said, any SBA approved lender, but also they've expanded to pretty much include any FDIC insured bank, any federally insured credit union. So they are expanding rapidly the number of financial institutions that are going to be able to process these loans, which is a great thing, I think, because instead of having the problems that we're having where everyone's trying to apply for unemployment and everyone's trying to apply for those SBA loans all on the one site, they're going to disperse the administration of this out to all of the banks. And hopefully this is going to flow much quicker, because instead of, every single person in Oklahoma where I am trying to apply under one website, we're going to be all working with our individual bankers who are going to spread out the workload. So they're working to expand the list of banks quickly.
Okay. Also, to be eligible, you had to have been in business as of February 15th. I forget if you said
Correct.
that or I said that. I did see a question here. If you're a new business owner and you've never paid yourself a salary, are you still eligible for PPL? And if so, how do they even determine your salary?
There's kind of a whole set of sub rules for new businesses. So I think I'm going to defer all of that to email me if you need more information about the ways everything changes and all the calculations changes and everything changes if you're a new business.
Okay. And does payroll for employers include 1099 and W-2 salaried employees?
No, I don't think that it is going to include you paying a 1099 person. I think that 1099 person can apply for their own PPP loan because they're a 1099 business. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you're not applying so that you can continue to pay people on 1099. They're applying because they have a 1099 business and they can apply for their own PPP loan.
Okay.
So when you're turning in, so the banks are going to be required to underwrite. They are going to be required to verify your calculation of what your payroll is. So if you imagine that what you're going to be turning in, if you're a business, you're going to be turning in your 2019 tax return essentially and your 2019 W-2 statements. If someone that you pay as an independent contractor is going to apply, they're going to be turning in the 1099 that they received from you.
Okay. For those of us that have a small number of employees or a larger number of employees, what would you recommend that we be gathering so that we can be ready to have the documentation that we need to support the number that we're going to be applying for in terms of loan relief?
It's exactly those two things. I think you need to be gathering all of your 2019 payroll information for purposes of supporting the number of which how much can you borrow is going to be based on. So I think you need to be, if you're self-employed or you're Schedule C or whatever, you're going to be needing to gather your 2019 income and expense numbers and all of your 2019 payroll cost numbers. If you can get that stuff together, then as you start to be able to look at this application, you're going to be able to see, and your individual bank is probably going to have a more specific list sooner rather than later. I'm thinking by Monday, you're probably going to be able to get a list specific from your bank about what they would like to see from you.
Okay. I've heard some, buzz about you can apply for these loans as early as this April 3rd. Is that this Friday? Yes, this Friday. I can't believe it's April 1st. Is that accurate? Is that what you've heard as well?
Yes, according to the Treasury regulations, starting April 3rd, small businesses and sole proprietorships are going to be able to apply. Starting April 10th, which will be next week, independent contractors and self-employed individuals are going to be able to apply. So that's my understanding as well. Now, of course, every single bank is trying their hardest to spin this up as well. So, talk to your individual bank. I've heard anecdotal stories that they're working on lots of them are working on trying to get their, application portal, because of course all the bank lobbies are closed and you can't go in and it's all a problem. So I would call your individual banker. I've heard some anecdotal stories that some banks are sort of saying we're going to process our current customers first. So I would probably start with whoever it is that you have your normal banking relationship with, and check about their procedures. But everybody immediately after this is going to be able to get online and download a copy of the official application that all the banks are going to be required to use, because it's streamlined. It's 1 page long, pretty much. It's right there. It's a PDF fillable form from that site that we gave you, that's treasury.gov/cares. So I would start there and start working on getting your documentation together for that, so that as soon as your bank is ready to go, you're able to submit.
Okay.
Oh, and I guess just one other thing I will say that kind of covers what I was going to say about how you can apply, other than that there is some indication, even within the Treasury regulations, that that there's a limited pot of money, and they're encouraging people to apply sooner rather than later. Technically, the application period is going to be open all the way until June 30th, but if you're on this, then you're on it, and if you think that this is going to work for you, then you need to you want to go ahead and get started on your application sooner rather than later.
Yes. I see one question here about an individual that thought they have already filled out the form online. Do they also need to contact a bank? I'm wondering if that could be confused with the economic disaster relief loan form that was online. I'm not sure. Kendra, do you know if this Paycheck Protection Program application, I know it's available online, but can you complete it online, or this has to go through a local bank, right?
This has to go through a local bank, and it was only just posted yesterday afternoon. So if you think you have already applied for something, my inclination is you probably have already applied for the SBA's emergency loans, which
Yes.
We'll talk a little bit about how those are going to intersect after we get done. But this is an entirely new program from Friday's bill, and the application just went up yesterday, and it's just a PDF, and you have to apply through your local bank. So you probably haven't yet submitted any sort of an application for this one.
Okay. I see lots of questions about forgiveness.
We're gonna go there next.
Yes, let's dive right into the forgiveness part of the loan.
So, separated from how much you're going to apply to be able to borrow, you are then going to be able to separately apply by separate application for forgiveness of the amount of this loan that you spend during the 8-week period beginning on the date of the origination of the loan. So the expenses that you spend during the 8 weeks beginning on the date that your loan is originated, and you're going to be able to apply for forgiveness for the amount that you spend on payroll costs, just like we just talked about, but also the amounts that you spend on interest, on your mortgage, or rent, whichever you have, or for payments of utilities. So the amount of this loan that you're granted, you will be able to, the amount of it that you spend during the immediate 8 weeks following the date that your loan originates on payroll costs, interest, rent, or utilities. A couple of caveats that are brand new yesterday afternoon from the Treasury regulations, yesterday afternoon to this morning. The obligation for any of these things, like for example, your lease, it has to have been in place before February 15th. Okay, so you can't run out now and sign a lease for a new space and use this money to pay for it, right? So if it has to have been an obligation of yours that was in place before February 15th. And according to the new guidance that we were getting just yesterday afternoon and this morning, not more than 25% of the amount that is forgiven is going to be for things other than payroll. So based on the regulations from Treasury, they are going to be strongly pushing that the vast majority of this money that you get, if you're going to ask for it to be forgiven, that it's used for payroll cost.
Do you have any tips on how we, sorry, I'll let you get through. I'm just wondering about tips on how we track, how we use the funds for those specific purposes. It's probably a bookkeeping exercise.
It's sort of a bookkeeping exercise. However, if you fund a loan and let's say it funds into your account for, you know, $20,000, and you pull out of that separate account for only for funding payroll and those kind of things, that I think would be helpful experiment. You are going to be required when you apply for the forgiveness to be able to document how much you spent on each of these things. So you're going to need to provide the actual payroll tax returns to support the fact that you paid it for payroll cast, or check stubs, and you're going to have to be able to supply with your application for forgiveness. You are going to have to be able to supply documentation that proves that you paid for it for one of these things during that 8-week period.
Okay.
Yeah, but you've got some time between now when you apply and when your loan funds for you to gear up for a plan for that. So, you know, just know that you're going to have to be able to do that, and that's what you're going to be able to be using them for. So that's how much you're going to theoretically be able to be forgiven. All the amounts that you spend on those, with the caveat that no more than 25% of that's going to be for these other expenses that are non-payroll. The amount of the forgiveness can be reduced in a couple of different ways, right? So if you're thinking, okay, I've spent, you know, $50,000 on these 4 costs during those 8 weeks, then the amount that you can get forgiven would be reduced in a couple of ways. One, it can be reduced based on a reduction in your number of employees, okay? It's also going to be, I'm going to go through the details of exactly how this works in just a second, but it can be reduced based on a reduction in the number of your employees. It can be reduced based on a reduction in the amount of the salaries of some of the employees that you have. So let's go through the details. The reduction in the amount based on number of employees is going to essentially have you taking the average full-time equivalent number of employees that you have during the 8-week period versus one of 2 options. You get to pick one of 2 options versus the average number of full-time equivalent employees that you had from February 15th to June 30th of 2019. Okay? So your average full-time employees during the 8 weeks versus your average full-time equivalents during February to June of last year, or your average number of full-time equivalents from January 1 of 2020 to February 29th of 2020. Right? So you can either compare your number of average full-time equivalents during the 8-week period to either the period from last year or the period from early this spring, whichever one apparently by your option is better for you. Okay? So let's say that you have laid off half of your staff compared to whichever one of those you're doing. The amount that you just calculated that was forgivable is going to be reduced by half. If you have at least the number of full-time equivalents during the 8-week period that you had during that comparison period, then you're 1-to-1, and then you're going to get forgiven for everything that was calculated in those 4 forgiven categories. Okay, so that's one way you can get reduced. If your full-time equivalent drops in comparison to one of those periods, there's a reduction in the amount that's forgiven. 2, a reduction based on the value or the amount of the salaries. So for employees who did not earn during any pay period in 2019 annualized more than $100,000. So basically, not counting employees who earned more than $100,000, the amount that you have reduced their wages, the amount of the reduction in wages that's greater than 25% compared to their most full recent quarter, right? So if you have essentially reduced hours or reduced payroll or said, you know, you're only getting 50% pay or whatever, for the comparison on those is if the reduction is more than 25%, then the amount of the reduction will be taken off of the amount of your forgiveness. right? So if you say, again, if you've had $50,000 worth of payroll costs during that 8-week period, but the amount of that you have reduced salaries for non-highly compensated employees, essentially, is going to be reducing the amount that you're forgiven. Okay? There's been a lot of talk about the reductions and the hiring back, so let me get all the way through that, and then we can kind of pause and breathe here.
Okay.
So if you have already reduced your full-time equivalents or wages, if you have already made a reduction in those, you would not be penalized for making a reduction in those things between February 15th and essentially April 26th, 30 days after this thing was enacted. You won't be penalized for making a reduction during those periods if you have eliminated that reduction by June 30th of 2020. So essentially, if you have hired people back by the end of June, then that's going to not penalize you in the calculation we were just talking about the number of full-time employees or the reduction in salaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a little separate and different than like if you wait until the end of your 8 weeks and you don't hire them till the end, then you didn't pay the payroll cost, right? So each one of these three things has a different separate calculation. But for the purposes of, am I going to have that amount that I've paid out reduced because I have less full-time employees? The answer is no if you have rehired them back by June 30th. Okay, so that's how the forgiveness is going to work. I'll just quickly mention while we're at it, just to kind of get through the basics of what's here before we go to questions, that just as of last night and or this morning on the new Treasury regulations, it is, they have clarified what the actual terms are going to be of the amount that is not forgiven, okay? So the amount that gets borrowed, because this is a loan to the extent it is not forgiven, is going to be at 0.5% interest. 0.5% interest loan, complete deferral for 6 months, interest-only payments starting at the end of the 6 months, due in full in 2 years. Right? So even if all of it doesn't get forgiven, the loan terms are going to be very favorable. Now, it doesn't mean you go out and load up on debt, you know, to put yourself under, but it does mean that to the extent that you want to keep your valuable employees and you use this program, to the extent that you use it primarily for paying payroll, I think you've got a great shot at it all being forgiven. And to the extent that some of it, because you have made a, you know, let's say you have laid off some people, and so your calculation is going to reduce it by 20% because you have laid off 20%, the terms on which the rest of the money is borrowed for, that you then use that money to pay rent instead, the terms on the repayment for that are going to be very favorable. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you reduce, you know, if you use this money, you get your calculation of what your 2.5 times is, you use that money to pay payroll for the 80% of the staff that you kept, plus you use it to pay rent for not more than 20% of what, or 25% or whatever it is. When you go to apply for forgiveness, even if you're limited on the forgiveness sum, then, you know, the terms on which the repayment terms are going to be are also going to be really favorable. You know, the original language, this is all sort of new from the regs just yesterday afternoon / this morning. The statutory language said not more than 4% interest, but we've heard this morning that it's only going to be 0.5 point. You know, however, the regs or the original statutory language said would be repaid when not more than 10 years. We've heard today that it's going to be a 2-year, basically balloon payment when it's done.
Okay. Any prepayment penalties on that?
No prepayment penalties, no collateral, no personal guarantees. With the caveat that you are swearing that you will use it for these 4 expenses, and if they find out that you defrauded them by borrowing it and didn't use it for those 4 expenses, there are significant sort of don't lie to the government penalties, right? So there's no personal guarantee and there's no collateral, but you know, you can't lie on your application. I think it's like a $25,000 penalty or something like that for lying on your application, or for, you know, not using it for the covered purposes.
Okay. Kendra, I've seen some notes here about what is a full-time equivalent type thing, and hourly employees and how that's handled. Can you give any guidance there?
My general understanding is full-time equivalent is 32 hours a week or more, but I actually have been looking for and haven't seen anything in the specific code section here that does anything to modify that sort of general understanding of this. So I'm hoping that we're going to get a little more guidance eventually about exactly how we're calculating FTEs and exactly which code section we're borrowing from to calculate that. So if I get more any sort of specific information about that, I will let you know. My inclination is that we're probably going to have a real specific way that we figure out exactly how that is in the next few days before the banks start processing this application, because they have to underwrite how many FTEs that you have. So if you have a real complicated situation with that, I think kind of stay tuned and check with your specific bank about what they're gonna show on the underwriting for that.
Okay, I'm scrolling back through. I'm looking at questions. Kendra, if you see any questions here that you can just chime in on that you feel like are...
I think, yes, business rent, not personal rent. And, I suppose if you have a home office and you're qualified for the home office deduction, maybe you can, work that through. But I think, yeah, business rent, not personal rent. Health insurance premiums are, I saw some treasury, you need to look specifically about the health insurance premiums. Some of the stuff from the new treasury guidance this morning that came, let me see if I can find that. I saw some stuff this morning about with the new regs about the health insurance premiums that's not specifically included in the part that can be forgiven. So it's an allowable expense for purposes of calculating how much you can borrow, but not in the 4 categories of things that can be forgiven.
Okay. I also see some people asking for an example, just kind of a concrete example that we could walk through. I did see an example on a third-party site. I can walk through that, and Kendra, you can correct me if you feel like any of this is inaccurate, or if you have an example, feel free to share it.
I don't have anything prepped as an exact example yet. I have been working on a sort of spreadsheet calculation for this that you could start to plug your numbers into, but I'm not quite there on exactly what that's going to be because it's so specific to what kind of expenses that you have. But, on a really simple basis, if let's say you've got, payroll of $10,000 a month, you're going to be able to qualify for $25,000 of a loan, right? And assuming that you then spend all of that $25,000 on payroll for your 2 people, that's the 20,000 of that is payroll for your 2 people, and the other 5,000 of that gets spent on rent payments, right? Then you should be able to qualify for 100% forgiveness because you had 2 people, you still have 2 people, you spent all of the money on qualified payroll and expenses. When you apply, you should be able to show very clearly that you've spent all, this is the X amount I spent on payroll during that 8-week period. Here's plus my canceled checks for my rent. So it should be all forgiven.
Pretty incredible. I think this is why it's historic.
It is very historic. And lots of times they try to make programs that are hard. I don't think that's the intent here. These are kind of shockingly simple. It's like a 1-page application, and again, not that you want to be very careful, because one thing I do want to clarify is, again, I keep stressing, you have to spend it within those 8 weeks in order for it to be the part of the forgiveness. Right? So you're not going to get a do-over if you accidentally get to week 10 and you decide you didn't spend it, or you need to do it on something else, right? So once the loan funds, you're going to want to be concentrating on how it gets spent during those 8 weeks. But to the extent that it doesn't get spent, or to the extent that you decide, I laid a couple people off. I really don't think I have any business rehiring them in the long run. Yeah, that's going to mean that my stuff is reduced a little bit, but I can use this loan to pay the people that I do have, and it's going to be a 0.5% interest loan that's going to carry me through this time. They're still great loan terms, and they're still much, much easier to get SBA loans that are SBA guaranteed, no prepayment penalty, no collateral, no guarantee. These are still much better loan terms than you would get on any of the other, like from your commercial bank, or even, there's even less requirements to get this than there is the other kind of emergency loan grant that we're going to talk about next. So, I don't think that people should be, if you take the whole of the amount that they give you and you put it in a bank account and you only use it for authorized expenses, and then at the end, you don't get all of it forgiven, well, you still have the rest of it, you can just pay it back, right? So, I mean, I think it's going to be very popular, and I think, people are going to be able to, you have to be able to be in business, you have to be a qualified employer, and you have to be able to say, you do have to be able to certify that you think that your business is potentially going to be infected by this, but I don't know which one of us can't say that we're not sure that our clients are going to be able to pay us next month, even if we think we're going to have work to do. Mm-hmm. So I feel pretty comfortable that we're all going to be able to say, yeah, I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to have enough cash to make payroll,
Yeah. I'm getting lots of questions about how does this work if you're the business owner that takes a draw, and maybe you don't pay yourself a salary. Maybe you do have employees, maybe you don't, but can you speak to that?
Everything that I have read, and it is my complete understanding that, just like I was saying about applying for how much is counted in terms of the payroll cost, that for solo practitioners or for independent contractors or whoever it is, that it's going to be able to count your SE income, your draw income to yourself, whatever it shows on your 2019 return. The section that talks about what can be included for forgiveness references payroll costs as defined under that earlier section. So I think it is pretty clear that if you're paying yourself your draw, as long as it's not over the 100,000, you're going to be able to count the amount that you're normally paying to yourself in a draw.
Yeah. Good question here. Will this be counted as revenue for tax purposes?
The amount that is forgiven will not be counted as revenue, unlike normal forgiveness of loan income. So that is huge. Yes, that's a great question. So the amount of the forgiveness will not be counted as revenue, as income, as forgiveness of debt income.
Okay. It's almost too good to be true, right?
Sort of sounds like it, but I tell you that if you don't pay your people, they are going to apply for unemployment and they're going to get it, and the government is going to pay them under unemployment. So in order to ease the tension on the unemployment system that they have to administer themselves, they are essentially enlisting private employers and enlisting private banks in order to keep people on payroll and off unemployment. So I know it seems too good to be true, but I really think that that's what was intended here, based on everything that I'm seeing and how quickly they are trying to get us the guidance out about this, and how quickly they are trying to make it possible for the banks, to get this done. By the way, the banks are getting paid. So the banks are getting origination fees on this and processing fees on this, which is all going to be not charged to the applicant and charged to the SBA. So they are utilizing us as private employers to keep people on payroll and keep them off unemployment in order to keep the whole economy going during this. So I think, to the extent that, I'm not saying that there's not going to be any hoops that we have to jump through, but I am saying, that it's, it's going to be popular for a reason. And if, people are going to apply, and it's going to be a flood.
Okay, another quick question, and then we've got to move on to the economic disaster injury loans and that program. But help us understand unemployment with the PPP loans and how those can work together, and as a solopreneur, how you might be able to potentially benefit from both.
I think you sort of, as a solopreneur, I think you sort of have the options of both of those things. Again, I am a little short on the details for how and it's going to be through your state to apply for unemployment, but I have not seen anything yet that would lead me to believe that you couldn't get a PPP loan that would cover you for this 8-week period. And then if you're still basically unemployed at the end of it, that you couldn't apply for unemployment then. Based on that. So I haven't seen anything that's causing me to think that, if you need unemployment for the next few weeks while you're getting an application in for one of these PP loans, that you couldn't apply for unemployment and that somehow that would prevent you. Because remember, again, you can rehire before June 30th. So you can rehire yourself, right? So if you have fired yourself because you have no clients and you applied for unemployment in the meantime, I think you can rehire yourself as soon as you get this loan funded, and pay yourself for the next week. So I think, take advantage of both as much as you can. If your payroll amount is so small because for whatever, it's part-time or it's just a little bit or something like that. I did have a client on that we were talking through it yesterday. They have a very small 501c3 and just a few part-time employees. The amount of their average payroll was so small that I just really didn't think that it was hardly even going to be worth it for them to kind of get that. And honestly, if their people that got laid off can get this unemployment plus the $600 a week, their people probably weren't making $600 a week before. And so I think their people are going to be better off just filing for unemployment and not, just filing for unemployment and the little, it's a little museum, which is some part-time people, so it's not to say that it's absolutely going to be it for everyone. And I have seen some examples of, there are some other things. There are some employer tax credits and things that are going to give, we can talk about those a little bit. I think it's probably not the thing that's going to apply for most of the people in this group. So I wasn't planning to spend too much time on it, but there are refundable payroll tax credits for employers that is going to essentially pay for 50% of the wages to your employees, and the period is longer than 8 weeks. The potential period for it to apply is longer than 8 weeks. So I have seen a couple of example calculations that have run in very specific circumstances where that might be a better option for people that have, employees and say, they've been closed, they're a non-essential business, they've been closed, they've already laid off half the staff, they're not going to be able to hire them back, so therefore their PPP would be reduced by half anyway, and that this payroll tax credit might be a better thing for them. But I'm not sure this group is going to, my gut is that that's not going to be as beneficial for this group because it's not as an immediate, and it's not as simple, and it's more limited. So if that rings a bell that might apply to you, we can talk through. I can send you some more information about that tax credit.
Okay, and I think you've given good advice that, I know this all was signed into law on Friday, but at the end of the day, we're probably going to work with our bookkeepers, our accountant, our CPA that really have an understanding of our business, and our payroll and that kind of thing. Now they're learning the ins and outs of this as well. But I think if we're armed with enough knowledge about these programs and can talk to them about our specific businesses, they're probably going to be the best people to advise us on our specific situation.
My gut is that's true because, it's hard for me to say exactly how it's going to work for you because I don't have your specific payroll numbers in front of me, but your person who preps your tax return or your bookkeeper is going to be able to take those numbers and, run some calculations and help you see how it's going to be applicable to your situation using your real numbers. And we're getting hour by hour here more guidance about exactly how it's going to be calculated. So, let's give it until next week. And I think we're going to have a pretty good picture I think your bookkeepers and your accountants and your CPAs are going to have a pretty good picture of what they need to pull from the information they already have from you to kind of give you an idea how this is going to look.
Okay. And I'm seeing some, concern about urgency and kind of not being able to sort of wait for all of these loan applications to get approved and work its way through. So for those small businesses that I guess, would your recommendation be that you talk to your banker, you try to secure a loan if you don't already have a line of credit or something in place that you can utilize right now just to kind of get you through the short term. But Kendra, didn't you advise that your interpretation was that funds could be used if they were for payroll sort of to repay that line of credit and funds that you drew on?
I'm not sure that it's going to be a forgivable expense for you to repay the line of credit from previously. I think you're going to need to actually use it on payroll costs during the 8 weeks that it's funded.
Okay.
During that 8-week period. But yeah, I think I don't think you're going to be able to just basically borrow this and use it to pay down debt, even if you incurred that debt to pay your other things.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, let's get to economic injury disaster loans. Let's talk about that program and sort of the interplay with PPP and EIDL.
Okay. Well, EIDL, some of you may have already heard about, but it's basically a direct loan payment through the SBA that's going to make you apply directly through the SBA and for an emergency disaster loan. And my understanding, and I don't want to get too much into the details of this because there's been a ton of webinars, because this program was already available previous to. So, I mean, Ashley gave a previous webinar, I think, about exactly about all of these. So won't spend too much time on the intricacies of the application, but the ones that were already the direct loans that you could apply for with the SBA are these EIDL grants. Those I think you can borrow like I think 6 months worth of working capital, and you can and the list of things that you can use those loans for is greatly expanded, I think, from the things that you can use this PPP loan for. So the PPP is very focused on payroll, and especially with the guidance, the Treasury regulation guidance today, it's really primarily focused on funding your payroll and rent during those periods. But the emergency disaster loans that can be done through the SBA have a more expansive availability to them. The interplay, it is clear that you are going to be able to get both. You cannot get both for the same purpose. So the actual, statutory language of this new grant for the PPP basically says, you can, if you already have an EDL loan or if you get an EDL loan during this time, you just can't use it for the same purpose as your PPP loan. So I think it's clear that you can do both, but you would want to make sure that your EIDL loan, that you apply for it and get it and use it for other purposes than the part of this. It's also clear that if you have already gotten an EIDL loan, primarily for the purpose of payroll, you can essentially refinance it into one of these PPP loans. So you can take your EIDL loan that you've gotten or that you've applied for, and you can basically roll that loan into one of these PPP loans, which I understand would make it qualify for these sort of forgivable things. So technically the statute says, the amount that you can get one of these PP loans for is the 2.5 times your payroll cost. It's really actually, 2.5 times the payroll cost, or your EIDL loan if you're rolling it in there. So there's some technical language about that, but I think it's pretty clear that you can roll those ones into these. The caveat is that attached to those those emergency disaster loans, there was a provision for basically an immediate $10,000 grant, which was not a loan. It was a emergency funds grant, essentially to try to provide people, emergency cash. I've seen, the headline saying that it's supposed to be within 3 days of your application, but I'm not sure I have yet communicated with any living human who's actually seen their application be processed and has gotten their $10,000 in their hands yet after this whole thing has happened. But that is one caveat. If you have gotten, or you do get that free $10,000 that is the grant part of your disaster loan, that $10,000 is going to come off the amount that can be forgiven from your PPP loan. So that's the only, you can have both. You got to use them for separate purposes. But if you get the 10K, then you're going to have whatever your forgiven amount is going to be that whatever the calculation shows, less whatever the reductions, if any, less the 10K that you already got given to you for free, essentially, by the SBA.
Okay.
But again, then your payment terms are those 0.5% interest, deferral for 6 months, due in full in 2 years.
Yes. Does the disaster loan qualify for forgiveness as well? It does.
No, it does not, except for the $10,000 portion that's actually a grant and not a loan.
Okay. And the terms of the economic injury disaster loan, I think I have it here, Kendra, 3.75%, 30-year term,
Yes.
no prepayment penalty. I'd love to know from any of the attendees if you have applied and received some sort of grant or funding.
I would love to know as well.
If you're willing to speak up, we'd love to connect with you because we're just trying to get a better understanding of how quickly that process works. So
can you apply for the grant and not the loan? My understanding is no, you apply for the emergency disaster loan and then the grant kind of comes along and piggybacks with your application for the emergency disaster loan. If you don't get a PPP loan, is the 10K grant an actual grant? Those two are completely separate. So again, the 10K grant comes with the emergency disaster loan, and those ones come from the application that is actually with the SBA at sba.gov, not this whole separate program from the PPP that is with your lender.
I am going to link that.
Somebody's saying, applied yesterday, received a claim number, haven't heard anything. I got, you know, I'm getting tangential, so I got some, you know, one of the chains I'm on that had an email that was a CPA that had applied a week or two ago and had not heard anything.
Okay. All right. The majority of attendees have hung on here through the thick of it all, Kendra.
I'm pretty impressed, and here we're only, you know, I mean, maybe ready for questions here at an hour and a half in.
Yeah. Do you, let's see, questions are coming in now. Do your 2019 taxes need to be filed to qualify for the payroll protection loan?
I do not think that there's a technical requirement that they need to have been filed.
Okay. Can you send links later to apply for each discussion point? We will do our best to do that. Okay. Let's see. What are the limits on the economic injury disaster loan? Or where can we find more about that information? I shared the web link. As far as limits,
those are going to be sba.gov is going to be your best source for the information on the disaster loan.
Okay. Let's see. Not using the grant for the same purposes, does that mean you can use the PPP for payroll and EIDL for all other operating expenses?
Yes, there's a specific list of things you can use the EIDL for, but it's more expansive. So yes, like you'd use the PPP for your payroll and you'd use the EIDL for the other operational expenses.
Okay. It didn't ask for an amount when we applied for EIDL. Will they calculate it or will they ask? From what I remember is, you know, you had to put in an estimate, you know?
I haven't filled out an application for one of those. I think it's sort of more based on what they calculate as your 6 to 8 months of like working capital or something like that. And you have to provide a lot more financial information with that application, I think. So I feel like you need to provide some amount of estimates, but it's kind of based on what they calculate they're going to give you, I think.
Yeah. How much impact do you estimate like your business will face as a result of this? And then you have to sort of defend those projections if you borrowed too much, I guess. Let's see. What else?
Saying that they didn't ask for a specific amount when they applied. They just applied and submitted their information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who's going to pay for all this? Oh man.
Eric, you are.
Yeah. So for
they're just going to print some money.
For the payroll, the PPP loan, you apply through your bank. For the EIDL disaster relief loan, you apply through the SBA. Address S corps, I see.
Not sure what the question is there. I mean, if you have an S corp, you probably are paying yourself salary as part of your S corp. So I think you're going to have payroll. If you're getting salary through an S corp, you're going to have payroll there.
Yeah. It says, I don't have any employees. Can I get the PPP loan just for business rent and utilities?
I think that you can get the PPP loan. Well, no, you've got to have payroll costs, but you're going to be able to, it's based on the amount of payroll cost, but that includes for self-employed individuals, basically your net income for last year. So if you've been in business, and even though you don't have any other employees, if you made, if your Schedule C last year showed that you made $50,000, then I think that $50,000 would be, divided by 12 to get your average cost, and then you would be able to apply for 2.5% of that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the forgiveness stuff, you got to pay yourself, or if you only use it for business utilities, then you still should be able to use it and take advantage of the loan terms, even if it's not forgiven. And it's going to be easier to get through your bank than the SBA one. Let's see. Is there a specific place we can go to see the list of the participating banks? Yes. I'm not sure it's 100% super up to date yet, but on that same treasury.gov/cares link, there's several links to the application and the information for borrowers, and one of the places on the information for borrowers sheet has a supposed link. But they have greatly expanded, even from Friday. Yesterday afternoon, they essentially said it's not going to be just as previously SBA approved lenders. It's going to basically be all SBA approved lenders plus all federally insured banks and credit unions that are participating. So essentially, I think your bank is going to be able to participate even if they weren't really an SBA approved lender before. So I would start with wherever it is you have your primary banking relationship on this.
Yes. Yes, and I had heard a rumor that certain banks were only dealing with customers that were applying for loans in excess of a certain amount and that sort of thing, and some of them were specializing in smaller loan amounts. I don't know if any of that's going on. Do you, Kendra? Have you heard that at all?
I've just heard the same sort of anecdotal stuff that everybody's been forwarding, and my bank, sending out a thing. So I think, you're not limited to only your bank. I would call your bank first, whoever that is, but if you don't, if they're not doing it or they're not working on it, I think all of them are going to be available to process.
Okay.
The 8 weeks starts when the loan originates. So basically on the date of the origination of the loan when they fund.
I feel like I had seen some unemployment questions along the way here about employees that had already filed for unemployment.
What do you do if your bank is closed? Banks are essential services, so I think, if their lobby's closed or something like that, hopefully you're going to be able to submit the application electronically. If they're absolutely closed and they're, closed and not answering their phone, which I would be sort of surprised about, then I'd say you just go to a different bank. Are the PPP loans expected to fund quickly? Someone is saying they heard June or July, but that's a long time. I haven't had a specific banker tell me that they think they're going to have money in anybody's hands by X date. But if the Treasury is saying you can apply on Friday, I would expect that we would start seeing this stuff roll much quicker than June. I really do. I mean, they're trying as hard as they can. I don't think the intent is for it to be months. I think the intent is for it to be, in April here.
Mm-hmm. If the staff applied for unemployment, it shouldn't affect the PPP, or we can hire them back then, right?
Yeah, if you've laid people off and they've applied for unemployment, then if you hire them back, then they're going to be not eligible for unemployment in the weeks after you've hired them back. But it's not the fact that that's another good point. It's the fact that they've applied for unemployment. It shouldn't affect you on the PPP loan, because you don't even have to really say anything about that on your application. But that is another good point about the unemployment. If they apply for unemployment for a COVID-related 19 decision, at least here in Oklahoma, and I think very broadly, here there's been a specific executive order that those unemployment claims will not hit your employer unemployment calculation, like to calculate, like usually if you fire someone, like your unemployment tax rate will go up. So I think you can, my reading of what was allowed and what was not allowed in terms of you sending them to the unemployment offices is that you can remind them that they should mention that they were laid off because of COVID. And then when and if somebody does file unemployment for you and you get that here, this person has claimed unemployment part, you're allowed to respond and submit information that it shouldn't hit your employer rating because they were laid off for a COVID related reason.
Okay. I think we're pretty good, Kendra. I think we've
fantastic.
Answered all the broad general questions. Again, if you have something hyper specific, unique to your individual circumstance, I've included Kendra's email. I'm happy to pass along information or links that I have access to and help out. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, Kendra, for just sharing all of your knowledge, taking the time to spend your weekend understanding this 850 plus page bill and what it means for solopreneurs and small businesses. Again, just thank everybody. I will include links afterwards. We'll try to email everyone the important links where you can find all of this information. Any other final words from you, Kendra?
No, I guess I would just say, I'll try to answer questions as I have time. I have plenty of clients who are, struggling with different things as well. So I'll try to answer questions as I have time that are general in nature. If you need me to do something related to your specific business, I'm only licensed to practice in Oklahoma and Kansas. So I can try to answer questions, and could take people if they were in one of those jurisdictions, but also, just trying to help and get the word out. So for everybody, I might start with whoever your accountant or your bookkeeper is. If you don't normally have an attorney that's on staff and looking into this, because we're all crazy with our own stuff right now. So might start with your accountant or your CPA, but you're welcome to pass my email along to that person too. And if you really need me, I'm available. But if I can just answer some general questions and follow up, I'll just try to do that as much as I can over the next couple of days. So.
Awesome. We will have this video. We did record it. We will have it that we will share publicly via wedsociety.com. So if you want to go and view it there, especially if you're in the wedding industry, make sure you sign up for our emails. We will also share it via BrandLink, who is the sponsor, brandlinkmedia.com, and we'll send out an email recap with the links. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe and healthy.
Stay safe and healthy and stay inside.
Yes.
Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.